Hello, everybody, and welcome back to part 3 of Return of the Archon. It is I, Tom, the very lowest of men, reinstated Drukhari main, and I'm here to take you through the next step of my journey with the Sky Splinter Assault Detachment and my run of events with Drukhari after getting their new rule set. So we've already talked about previous events and planning, so you'll be familiar with the process by now. So this is another event report covering my sort of journey to the Goonhammer Open, one of the sort of best smaller sort of GT events in the UK. Attracts a really good standard player, do their own thing in terms of terrain. Obviously, sponsored and run by my employers at Goonhammer, so shout out to them. It's an amazing event. I highly recommend trying to attend one in the future. I'm going to talk through the games that I played, the matches I went into, the different armies I faced, and all of my learnings from that. This was a very tough environment, and there were a lot of really important lessons and some really high caliber games. So very excited to talk about it. So we won't waste too much time. We'll get into it. So in terms of the structure, I'll take you through the event expectations. We'll cover my list. It's much the same with a small tweak. Then I've got the different rounds. This was a 6-round event, so there's a whole ton of games, whole ton of data. We've got Sisters, Chaos Knights, Hypercrypt Necrons, the Drukhari Mirror, Eldari, Unending Swarm Tyranids, and then I'll talk through some post-event analysis as well. As ever, please do hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you like what we're doing. We at 6 Plus massively appreciate the support. It means the world to us, so please keep on doing it. As far as event expectations for the Goonhammer Open goes, I think, very aware that this is a very high standard of event. I think the numbers were in the sort of 60 region in terms of actual players, but it had attracted an extremely strong caliber of player. There was a lot of the UK kind of top 10, top 20 in attendance, which means that you're going to get incredibly difficult games in a meta that has a bunch of very powerful armies. I think, things like Necrons and Custodies in abundance. So I was under no illusions that I think this would be tough for Drukhari. My assessment of Drukhari is that whilst it's a really fun and cool detachment, it's quite balanced, which means at the top of the competitive game, it struggles a little bit, and you really need a bit of luck and to play very well to get those kind of results. At previous attendances in the Goonhammer Open, I'd been in the sort of 3-3 scrapping for 4-2 kind of bracket, so I knew that this was going to be very tough. The terrain itself is Games Workshop inspired, so quite large, chunky blocks of terrain in your deployment, quite defensive, and a few nice staging points in the middle, but actually holding objectives in the middle was very dangerous. Central objectives were quite exposed. Now for Drukhari, this is good and bad. It means you can get your guns into the enemy, but it also means actually holding the middle is difficult, so you have to play that extremely carefully. It also means that with that kind of terrain, exactly what you pair into and the missions you pair into them on is very, very important. I was hoping to get a couple of games into very strong players because the odds of that were very high, and I wanted to continue building my meta knowledge of Sky Splinter because I still didn't have a ton of reps by this stage. I'd only played the one GT at Saffron, so keen to continue testing things and seeing if in practice the different matchups went the way that I thought they would be going to in my head. As far as the list goes, I was persisting with the Knifey Spoony special. That's a 20 Incubi build. So Lilith with Witches, Triple Archon, a Beastmaster, some Cabalites, and then a big brick of Incubi and 2 5s, 2 squads of Mandrakes for scoring and utility. I swapped the racks out in this event for 3 Reavers because I felt like getting to the middle on the GW boards was a little bit harder, which meant the speed of the Reavers and that nice quick OC2 was quite useful for doing the same sort of job I was doing with racks. I have my 2 Lance Scourge and 1 Haywire Scourge, Kronos, Ravager with Lances, 2 Raiders, and 3 Venoms. I got a really good draw for round 1 because I was paired into the wonderful Jack Tite. Jack Tite is a very young player in 40k, but he's one of the best in the UK. So I've had several games with him. He's local to me, and they've always been phenomenally tough games. And Jack has been on an excellent run with Sisters of Battle in recent times. He's top Sisters player in the UK. So I was under no illusions that this was an extremely difficult game, but also a really nice one to get round 1. And we were also very lucky because we got to play on the stream. Hellstorm Gaming streamed the event, so shout out to Mikey and his guys. They always take incredible care of me when I go on stream. And it was really, really fun getting to do our thing and have a laugh on stream with them. And, Jack's the kind of player where we're always joking, we're always learning, we're always helping each other across the game, but it's also a really high standard of competitive game. So if you want to watch that, that'll be on the Hellstorm channel. You can go and watch the Sisters versus Drukhari match from their coverage of the Goonhammer Open. Now, Jack's list is, I think, indicative of the direction that Sisters have gone since moving away from Exorcists and Artillery. So he has triple castigator tanks. These are really good, cheap, nasty gun tanks. He had 2 big bricks of arcoflagellants, very chewy blocks for the midboard. And then he had some Repentia, some smaller sister squads, 1 big sister squad with a 4-up Invan via one of the characters, and then Morven Val with 3 Paragon Warsuits to come in off the side and make trouble. And there were also some immolated transports. So this is a list that creates challenges for Drukhari because it has an enormous width of assets, which is normally an advantage we're looking to exploit. It's got good guns. It has excellent fight phase control tricks with stratagems to force you to fight into one particular unit, or stratagems to give them full fight on death, which is very, very challenging from a Drukhari standpoint because it throws open our trading game, right? We can't necessarily go into things like arcoflagellants or Repentia and expect to come out alive, which makes it hard to keep using our assets and recycling them in the way that Sky Splinter wants you to do. The mission itself was take and hold, so very generous primary scoring with quite open objectives, but a little bit of sort of staging to hide on one of the objectives on the far side. And it was a diagonal search and destroy deployment. And I got the first turn, which in this means I have to be proactive. I have to make trouble. And it makes it a little bit harder because unless I can build up a primary lead and put Jack away, he is likely to push back and win on the endgame swing. And when you're playing into someone good, you know they will play patiently and capitalize on the endgame. So it is very much up to you to take the initiative. Now, the way this game plays out is that I do a few things really well at the start. I use the Beast Pack on one flank to block Jack off from getting to his safer objective, which was something he clearly wants to do for the primary. And that's really big and has Jack a little bit on the back foot at the start. What I do less well is I have positioned my heavy incubi hitters on a flank, again with a mind to pushing up and continuing to hit Jack there. But actually what I needed to do was keep this central, because Jack, spotting the opportunity here, jams arcoflagellants down the centre. And he very correctly assesses that with the 4-up Feel No Pain that arcoflagellants have, my smaller incubi squads are much less likely to successfully go through and take out an arcoflagellant brick. So what happens in this game, you can see it on the stream, is that I have to commit one of the smaller incubi units instead. And what this means is that it's already very peaky to actually, as to whether they'll actually do enough to kill an arcoflagellant squad. But then Jack is very clever and he rapid ingresses some hand flamer jump pack sisters down so that they can overwatch as the incubi going in. So I lose 2 of the incubi, which then means they fail to make a significant dent in the arcoflagellants, which in turn kill them. And that gives Jack a massive counterattack opportunity through the center, which means he gets into some Scourge, kills some Scourge, and causes all sorts of problems. So you can see in the score gap, there's a real disruption there as I am pushed back and trying to deal with this. Lilith and her witches take out the other arcoflagellant brick, but the fight on death then takes them with them, which again, that trading difficulty. And I don't use my sort of Scourge and Ravager and Dark Lance tech here as effectively as Jack uses his Castigators. So he's able to kind of gradually trim away and get rid of my shooting assets without seriously losing his tanks, which makes it really, really difficult then for me to continue to sort of hold him off and push him back. And by the end of the game, I run out of steam. There's a Hail Mary to take his back objective towards the end with my Incubi brick going through the middle. And it was interesting to see the reach that a raider flying out from behind GW terrain can get on these boards, and that was something I bore in mind for later on in the sort of event. But ultimately, I ran out of puff. I've run out of too many units, and Jack is then able to sort of take the game on the end game swing, 83-61. So fantastic game. Some very clear issues in how I use certain assets. I do think Drukhari have game into Sisters. I think it's probably slightly Sisters favoured, but I don't think it's the case that Drukhari can't deal with or kill any of the units. It's just that I think you have to use the guns very, very effectively without losing any of them until you've whittled the Sisters down enough, and then you can start the melee trading game. So useful lessons for me. I hadn't really looked at or thought about the terrain pack much before the event, and I think this is one of those games where, you know, when you hit a top player round one, you wish you had, because Jack is the kind of player who's very well prepared, knows where he's going to put his units. And so it was a reminder to me that you can't ever sort of wing it round one if you're expecting to be able to get through a really well prepared player. So that was really good. Had a fantastic game, loads and loads of fun. So next up, I got placed into Chaos Knights. This was run by Jed, and Jed was running a fairly standard, loads of War Dogs, Brigands, Carnivores, with some Nurglings for scoring utility. And the mission was very, very influential in this game. So we had the Ritual. That's a mission where you build objectives yourself in and around the central one, and on hammer and anvil deployment, so a very long distance between the two armies. And in this particular matchup, what that means is because you can build objectives quite safely and castle up your army around them, it's very easy to take cleanse as a fixed secondary because you can reliably be cleansing from the start for the full 4 every turn, which means getting 20 on cleanse is very, very viable. And because Jed's army is entirely made up of vehicles, I can then also take Bring It Down. And from a secondary standpoint, I'm looking at 40 from the start, right? I'm in a very, very strong place on scoring. What that means for me is that my game plan can be patient. I can play reactive defensive. I can say, well, look, I'm going to do this. I'm going to pick off your war dogs as they try and get involved and try and score you things, because he was less able to go fixed with the assets that he had. And essentially what that means is the Chaos Knights have to be proactive. Chaos Knight artillery isn't very good into Drukhari. There's not enough of it to really meaningfully whittle down things like Scourge quickly enough unless I start making really bad saves, and he was struggling to pick them apart at a rate that would stop them from hurting the Chaos Knights. And I think that what I found with Sky Splinter is that between Dark Lance Scourge, Haywire Scourge, Cabalites, and multiple connecting melee units, you can easily kill 3 to 4 baby knights a turn. And I had 2 or 3 big turns where I killed, a whole bunch of little knights, which ultimately kind of broke the back of the Chaos Knight game plan and made it easy to roll through to a win. That plus the secondary scoring meant that we got the 100 and the Chaos Knights got 41. Jeb was lovely, really enjoyable game. But again, the Ritual's a funny mission. It definitely opens up different kinds of jank with the secondary scoring than some of the others. So then I was drawn in round 3 into Ben. Ben was an absolute gent to play, and Ben was running a much more known entity at this point in time, which is Hypercrypt Necrons. Now, Necrons in general are very difficult for Eldari to play into. And I think one of the reasons for that is that they have very powerful stat check units in things like Wraiths. So they're actually very hard for us to deal with. Catan as well, very, very hard for Drukhari to deal with unless you get lucky. And that means that what you tend to find is you have to commit too many resources to hurting these kinds of units that then you lose in response. If you fall short on killing Wraiths or a Catan, you might as well have not done it at all because then they start healing up. And it's very difficult to play like a trading game into them. I think with Hypercrypt, it's slightly better for Drukhari than the other builds that are much more in on Wraiths and Catan, because they tend to bring the Monolith, they tend to bring Immortals, and there's a lot more jumping up and down and less just bodying the primary from Hypercrypt, which for an army like Drukhari that can spread out and fill the board gives us opportunities to stop them dropping into useful places. Yes, they can use the 3-inch deep strike, but they can only use that in one place. It's the same with Grey Knights. If you fill the space so that only one unit's dropping in 3 inches away and nothing else can get anywhere productive, that unit's then going to die and they don't get the value they'd like to get from it. And in my particular build, on the advice of Rob Kimpton, I've got the Haywire Scourge, and Haywire Scourge love monoliths. As soon as that monolith comes down, Haywire Scourge are in a great position to do massive damage to it with dev wounds, which then makes it easier to pick the monolith up. The mission was priority targets, and I think I was on second turn. So this obviously means that with the end game scoring, if I can play slightly more patiently, I think the problem with doing that into Hypercrypt is that because it can get the angles it wants by jumping up and down, because its shooting is very good, and because it has great stodgy OC, I can't afford to play that way. The key with an army like Hypercrypt is to tag as much of it as you possibly can and stop it from running away. And things like the Monolith need to get tagged and then destroyed. So I needed to be proactive. I needed to get in Ben's face and cause problems to stop him just picking me apart at his leisure. So in this game, I used a few different things to sort of lure Ben out. I think there was some Mandrakes that lured his Wraith squad out, so his big brick of Wraiths came out. And then I had the Beast Pack positioned on another side to lure one of the Catan out. He had 2 Catan. So what happens in this game is that I get a couple of bits of luck. So the Reavers fly out and fire a single Heat Lance shot at a Transcendent Catan. He fails his save. I can't remember if he rerolls it or not, but the Heat Lance goes through. Heat Lance is a high melter shot gun, which is very good for Catan, so I think I do something like 7 damage to it just with this one Heat Lance. At which point it's then vulnerable enough to make it worthwhile shooting a bunch of Dark Lance Scourge at it as well, and I'm able to bring the Catan down turn 1. On the other flank, the Wraiths that have been lured out have come too close, which means I'm able to hit them with Lilith and my 10 Incubi bricks simultaneously. And what this means is that Lilith is able to use her precision to kill the Technomancer, which takes out the Feel No Pain on the Wraiths, which then means that the 10 Incubi brick, without a Feel No Pain to worry about, clean out the rest of the Wraiths. So that's a really strong start for me because two of the sort of tar pits in the list have gone down. And Ben then does the usual things. He drops in the Monolith, he drops in Immortals, and he hits me extremely hard. I lose transports, I lose the 10 brick of Incubi, I lose a lot of assets. So even with this strong start, I'm still needing to push and needing to continue to put the Necrons away or I'm going to fade out. And what I do is rush up with the remaining kind of melee assets, get into the Immortals and kill some of them, but most importantly, tie them up. The Rapid Ingress Venom comes in on a flank and takes Ben's home objective. And I'm able to basically gum the Hypercrypt units up the wrong side of the point, so they're not getting the primary that they need, and slowly whittle them down whilst my score is good, and eventually the Hypercrypt forces kind of run out of puff. And I think it's just Void Dragon, I want to say. I can't remember which Catan it was. It was either Nightbringer or Void Dragon, one of those. By the end, I managed to get it down to just Void Dragon being left. The Monolith takes 2 turns of Scourge shooting to kill, but it does go down, which is massive for me. And gradually I'm able to outmuscle them, which produces a 94-67 win. Now, Ben is incredibly sporting and really fun, and we had a really good time with it. I think it showcases a tendency I see in Necrons players at the moment where they're a little bit too confident about their durability. And I think the thing Necrons players need to remember is you're playing a hyper-durable army. Imagine if you also played that in a cagey and conservative fashion. So all that durability is even harder to deal with because you're not giving your opponent easy ins to test whether they can hurt you. If you take the risks on letting the opponent bring their weapons to bear on a Catan or a Wraith Brick and you get a bit unlucky, you lose that asset. And Necrons are much, much stronger when they prevent that kind of breakthrough moment. So I think that was one of the games where Ben needed to play a little bit more cagely. And him sort of coming into my sort of most dangerous threat ranges allowed me to exploit the tools that I had very effectively. So I think this is still a very tough matchup for Drukhari, but I think I had the edge in terms of my approach to the game. So I had a break overnight, and then I was drawn into Ben Pierce of Trash Wargaming in round 4. Now, Ben has recently started playing Drukhari, so he's been asking myself and Rob and others for advice. And he had been, I think he was placing higher at this event at the end of day 1, so he'd sent me a little sniffy message the night before saying he was now the best Drukhari. So then, poetically, 5 minutes later, we were paired into each other, which meant I had an opportunity to see how good Ben was. And Ben's list was a little bit more asset wide and cutting edge poorer than mine. He had more stuff, but less damage. More Venoms, more Cabalites, more Witches. Still Scourge and Incubi, but not quite as many. And it was a list that actually was very tough for mine because with Drukhari, everything's going to die anyway. So you don't need the cutting edge when you're playing into other Drukhari. That actually, the assets are more useful. And the mission actually was also one that Drukhari hate, which is Purge the Foe. So the thing with Purge the Foe is that because it's a kill more mission, Drukhari have millions of units that are very fragile. It's very easy for the opponent to score kill more. So in some ways, getting a Drukhari mirror on this is quite good. And crucially, the advantage that I was able to gain here was that I was on second turn. And what this means in a mission like Purge is that I have massive control over the kill more because we both have very weak units. We both have the ability to get angles into each other or get melee into each other and kill units. And because I'm on second turn, I can just be matching and then beating Ben's kills every turn and keeping up a nice lead on the primary. We're both good at primary denial, so neither of us are likely to get hold more. And again, at the end, I've got a good chance of hold more. So the onus is really on Ben in this situation to make something happen. If I had been placed on first turn, I would have had to throw basically the army at Ben and cause all kinds of chaos and try and win in the disruption. But because I don't have to. I can play a very defensive and reactive and control game, right? Doing just enough each turn to keep the scores in my favor and waiting to see if Ben's able to push and cause problems for me at a significant level. So Ben sort of gets caught in two minds. He has a Beastmaster as well. He throws that at me turn 1, but I have used my Beastmaster basically as a screen in front of my valuable stuff. So the only thing that happens is that my Beastmaster eats the charge from his, and he doesn't quite manage to kill it, right? He takes it down to like the last few wounds. So he hasn't got a kill round 1. I then obviously pick up his Beastmaster fairly easily because it's in my deployment zone. So now I've had a nice 8-point start to the game. I'm already in the lead. And the rest of Ben's army hasn't rushed up to capitalize on this. I think he needed to push up and stage very aggressively and then come and hit me with it. He hasn't done that, which means that there's still quite a gap between his lines and mine. and he struggles to really get in and meaningfully engage and hurt my units, which then means in my turn I can just keep picking units off and picking units off. Now, Ben mid-game sort of realizes the pattern of the game and starts making a lot more different things happen. We both start getting into each other's lines much more aggressively. We're both scoring secondaries really well, really happily. And ultimately, it's just these couple of early turns of lead and the fact I can score a hold more at the end that get me a sort of narrow 97-86 win. Ben played it very well. I think he just needed to jam at the start and accept some casualties and some chaos. I think Drukhari players are often reluctant to do this, but sometimes you just have to do it. You can't afford to be tentative or cautious. You're not going to win by just letting a holding pattern continue to develop. So good game, and actually, if I'm honest, given that Purge the Foe is in the pack, I was lucky to get Purge the Foe against another Drukhari army when my weakness could actually be my opponent's weakness as well. Next game, I had Greg Chamberlain on his Eldari. Now, Greg Chamberlain's a very good player. I've played him before, and he's an excellent, high-quality UK player. So Eldari is not his usual wheelhouse, and he was a little bit green on it in certain ways, but he played it really well. So he had Fire Prisms, D Cannons, and then the usual, Warp Spiders and Shadow Spectres and MSU in support, and Way Leaper running around, and Fugan running around with some Fire Dragons in that way that they do. So Eldari Drukhari is historically one in which Eldar have all the advantages. They're quicker, they hit harder, they have more tricks than we do. And in 9th edition, what I tended to find was you could beat them by overloading, throwing the entire army at them. But unfortunately, with the Eldari rules set in 10th edition, because you've got 3D cannons that are hyper efficient, can easily each kill a Drukhari vehicle every turn. Fire Prisms, hyper efficient, can easily each kill a Drukhari vehicle every turn. And then MSU that wipes out our MSU as soon as it gets a bead on it. It is entirely possible if you play Overload into current Eldar to just be tabled in 2 or 3 turns. So I think from a singles perspective, to win the game, I absolutely should have still attempted this. But I was sort of deciding going into the game that given it was a matchup I knew was really rough, I play Eldar as well, I'm fairly confident in my assessment of the matchup. My decision was I would prefer to make this difficult and make this close and practice, I guess, a kind of team scenario of this sort of matchup, like how difficult and how tight a differential can I make this? And on the mission that we had and the map that we had, which was Scorched Earth, so low primary really until someone gets a burn off, Dawn of War, so right in front of each other, it's a little bit about trading and standing off each other. Now, I've put Drukhari on first turn here. I actually wasn't on first turn. I think the Eldari were on first turn, which is difficult for me because I think if I have any chance at Overload, it involves going first and using the Beast Pack very aggressively to get into some units and tie some stuff up. I lost that opportunity when I go second, so I'm not able to Overload anyway, even if it was the option I was taking. So I think the decision then is, well, you have to stand off at the back, avoid the D cannons getting into your stuff because they can only threaten the midboard, and then using assets to throw out and keep the score down and slowly trim away all the Eldar MSU assets, the hope being that then they have to bring out the important stuff at the end and you can overwhelm them. And this plan works to an extent, and I had a few cute moments where I rapid ingressed a Venom in on a point to swing more primary than I think Greg expected me to get. I'd whittled away a lot of the units. I almost had a breakthrough into his backfield with an Archon and some Incubi. And there were a lot of knife edge moments, but the key thing for me was that I was a little bit too tentative in trying to get rid of his damage dealers. Like I needed to drop some Fire Prisms early on with Scourge, and I just never quite managed to get the kind of commitment to do it into that. I also mismanaged my pain tokens so that I didn't kill a Warp Spider unit fully. I left one alive, which then scored Greg 10 to 15 points of secondaries just flying around, which was very annoying as well. So a few moments of mismanagement on my part. That meant that by the end game, Greg was still in too strong a position for me to push him off the middle, and he was able to get a burn off on one side that I'd run out of assets to prevent, and I was not in a position to capitalize at the end and push through. So this took this to a very narrow 72-58 win. Very brutal, bloody game. Greg played it well. We had a lot of fun. I taught him a few tricks with Phantasm. You want to stand 1 inch off those objectives, Greg, so you could jump on, so I have to throw units away every turn in case you do. Don't forget to do it. But it was really, really good. Very tough game. And yeah, Greg just outmuscled me better, used his gradual sort of trading game more effectively than me, and particularly the Fire Prisms just bodied me off the midboard by the time the end game came around, so I wasn't in a position to take advantage. So really, really tough game. And yeah, I'd say Drukhari Eldari is a tough matchup, but it's one where I think the approach I adopted works well for denying a differential in teams, but I don't think it's going to win you games into Eldari. I think you need to take a couple of hits and try and get into them as quickly as you can. Finally, in round 6, I was drawn into my teammate Davey on his Unending Swarm Tyranids. Now, if you follow Davey's content, you'll know Davey is a big Tyranid fan, and he had been hyping Unending Swarm as a sort of large stat-checky type army. Very tough, loads of regenerating gaunts and chaff. Very easy to get caught out by things like the Surge from this that could end up with you drowning in gaunts on objectives. Now, Drukhari have some tools for this. Exocrines are okay into Drukhari, but not actually that great at reliably shooting our vehicles. And we have plenty of things that can kill through gaunts very quickly and very effectively. The battle shock from Incubi also makes the recycling a little bit dangerous from them in combat as well. But ultimately, the mission that we had was Vital Ground on sweeping engagement. And really, I think the key thing with this game was always going to be who got to the points first and who determined where the battle happened. Because Davey has some big gargoyle units. These can fly across and block in a bunch of my stuff. On my side, I've got the Beast Pack, which can fly across and block in a bunch of stuff. So we're both looking to put the other one in jail a little bit and block off the objectives. And in this game, I got the first turn. So I was able to play a very hyper-aggressive plan, similar to how I've played into Death Guard in the past, where the goal is to get tabled basically in the edges of their deployment zone by forcing them in, denying them opportunities to actually get to the middle to stop your primary or to get primary themselves, and push them back for as long as you possibly can. And I think in the main, I executed this fairly well. But I think what it is worth saying is that I should have learned basically from the game I had against Sam Squires in the previous GT where we ran out of time, that Tyranids Drukhari takes a long time. There's a ton of activations, tons of units, lots of thinking. And I took a lot of time making decisions because this was a really tough matchup and I was exhausted going into the 6th game. So actually, Davey and I ran out of time towards the end of this game. And I think, although as we worked it out with score, it was a narrow Drukhari win, I think it's one of those where we should have been on a clock. I had used my time up, and I think it's one of those where we've learned a lesson, and I didn't come away from this game feeling good because Davey's a good friend and a good teammate, and I think it was on me to manage my time and notice my time slipping responsibly, and I didn't do it. So it came out a narrow Drukhari win, and I don't think that's necessarily an unfair result, but I think my own time management in this game was not good because I was having to overthink things and was using too much time. And I'm normally a very quick, snappy player, so this was a slight sadness and frustration for me. So I am sorry to Davey. Davey's a babe. Obviously, we're very good friends, and we're all absolutely fine. But I think Davey and I should definitely have a rematch, Drukhari versus Tyranids, maybe for a bat rep. And he can get his revenge on me. So that took us to the end of the event. And in terms of my post-event analysis, I came 11th, I think, with a 4-2. I would like top 10, but I didn't quite make it. And I think I would say most of the games went broadly how I would anticipate. So that, again, confirmed that my sort of assessment of Drukhari in the meta was fairly happy. I think a lack of pre-event planning cost me in game 1, where I didn't think about the implications of where I deployed my Incubi Raider, and Jactai exploited it really effectively, and I made a few decision-making sequencing errors there. And I think in the Eldar game, if you want to win that game, you have to be aggressive, and the decision to play passive and to keep it close, whilst probably beneficial in terms of my score and in terms of the differential in the game, wasn't the one if I want to actually seriously win that game. What I'm finding is that Drukhari and Sky Splinter are definitely performing well outside some of the top armies in the game, and I think it's, as we identified on release for Sky Splinter, artillery, fight on death, fight first, these are still very heavy weak points for the army, which struggles into those things, always historically does, and there's a lot of it about right now, and that makes the very top games for Drukhari very difficult. I think there could probably question marks over how many Incubi I have. I do think I felt like I had some games where 1-5 of Incubi was sort of inactive, at which point you do start wondering, well, what if that was Cabalites, right? If I could have another 5-man of Cabalites sort of fire and fading out of the Venom, get a bit more dark light shooting on the board, would that be better? My Cabalites have consistently surprised me and performed well. I really enjoy them. I enjoy occasionally popping the Sustain 2 strat on them. But actually the points rejig to get them in is a real faff. And that's the main issue I'm finding is, what's a good alternative to try and sort of switch things around and work another unit into the list. And I need to experiment with it in the long term and see if anything else is possible. But I do just love Incubi so much, so I might not change it. It has become a bit of my signature since we got into this new stage of Drukhari, so I'm quite enjoying it for now. I enjoyed playing on the GW style terrain. I think things like the Reavers to fly out and get some OC2 on, also the Catan killers, as it turns out, worked really effectively. But I think Drukhari players in general need to see quite open mid boards, not as a pure death sentence, but as an opportunity, because the opponent has to come out there as well, which gives you opportunities to shoot them, and you have to use that nice width of small trading assets that you have to draw out their more valuable stuff and eventually push a win later game. And I think in general, all of these games reflected to me that, knowing when to jam, when to push, and when to wait, and when to hold off is still crucial. I think I had a good sense on it in several of the games, but I definitely didn't get it right in all of them. And this is an army where being able to practice overload effectively and dealing with casualties whilst creating new problems for the opponent is a real marker of using it to its highest level, because a lot of these missions you simply cannot hold off and deny and win. Especially if you go first, you just need to be proactive. So using Drukhari proactively and causing chaos in the game is extremely important. Thank you so much for watching. Been an absolute pleasure. I will be back again for actually part 4, which is going to be discussing my making the final and podiuming at Hearts GT. Really, really interesting event with another bunch of really good matchups on some quite interesting terrain. Please do continue to check out our Drukhari content on 6 Plus YouTube. It's really good to have all your support. Leave comments, like and subscribe, all of that good stuff. You can now become a 6 Plus YouTube member for early access to videos. We're doing some members only videos. I've covered rapid ingress and how to use it. I'm going to be covering how to deal with fights first this week. And you can also get access to a chapter master tier, and you can get coaching with myself or Chris via the team as well if you want to level up and build up your play with one of the armies that we play. Drukhari coaching, obviously, I'm your guy. And of course, do join our Discord. Get involved. We have a big free Discord, tons of members involved. We've got a very active Drukhari chat now because the good times are back for Drukhari. So do get involved in the conversation. Let us know how you're getting on with Sky Splinter Assault. I would love to hear that. Lowest of Men out. See you again next time. Bye-bye.